Let's turn to the book of Mark. Mark chapter 12, verses 18 through 27. For a title, I like to get some kind of title. The God of the living. That's what we're going to be talking about. The God of the living. We're following Christ in his story, Jesus, as it's told by the book of Mark, and he has come into the temple. Now, Jesus had been preaching in Galilee. He'd be out by the Sea of Galilee, and he'd be out, and the flock crowds would come, so many that he couldn't even stay in the synagogues. But now he has come right to Jerusalem, and he has come into the temple ground itself. Now, don't think of just the temple as the place, the holy place and the most holy place. It was a great ground. You might think of, well, now here we got a little building, the church house, but we got the parking lot around us. Well, expand that way out, and you have a vast temple grounds with different porticos and places, and people would go there and teach. And Jesus is there on those temple grounds, and he is teaching. Now, the scribes and the chief priests, they thought that was their ground. I mean, Jesus is now teaching openly right in the very home turf of those religious leaders. This is in the last week of his life, and he's holding nothing back and doing nothing subtle as he had some time before, as he was out about. Now he's brought it right home, and they think this is their home turf. Jesus called it my Father's house. It was his temple grounds. They were the ones on his home turf, but they didn't understand it that way. He came in and overthrew the money changers, and it upset them. The scribes, Mark 11:18, the scribes and chief priests heard it, sought how they might destroy him, for they feared him, because all the people were astonished at his doctrine. And then he comes back the next day, and it's like he's at a press conference. And this is what it sounds like to me. You've seen it when our president or the spokesman, they're sitting there, and there's a press conference, and the questions sometimes really frustrate me. It's not that they're getting the news. What are they doing? They're trying to get the person they're asking, they're trying to get them crossed up in their words. Get them to say something that they can create a scandal out of. It's not like they're really trying to find out the news, and they do it both sides. You'll see that happening, and that's kind of what's happening to Jesus. They're gathering around him, and they're going to ask him questions, not because they want information, but because they want to entangle him in his talk. And so they come again to Jerusalem as he was walking in the temple, and the chief priests and scribes and elders say, by what authority do you do these things? And Jesus told them that parable of the wicked husbandman. It explained the authority, and it says in Mark 12:12, they sought to lay hold on him but fear the people, because they knew he'd spoken the parable against them. Well, then come the Pharisees and Herodians, and here it is, to catch him in his words. Is it lawful to pay tribute unto Caesar or not? And that's when Jesus gave that answer, to render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, and unto God the things that are God's. They marveled at him. And then come the Sadducees. The Sadducees. And they say there's no resurrection. Let me explain the Sadducees to you so we know who they are. There were different sects among the Jews. All the Jews did not believe the same thing. And so there were the two big sects, or the ones that everyone didn't belong to one of these two sects, but there are the Pharisees on one side and the Sadducees on the other. In this period between the Testament, the rivalry between them had grown so fierce that there'd been bloodshed over this division. But now that had calmed down somewhat, but still the Pharisees and Sadducees really did not care that much for one another. Let me explain these Sadducees. Sadducees were well off in worldly goods. They might be to what we sometimes call, and maybe we shouldn't, or maybe we should, but sometimes call the elite. That'd be the Sadducees. They were well off financially. They were kind of in power over things and had a lot of influence. And they had a religion that served their worldliness. The Sadducees were very proud of their temple in Jerusalem. And the priests that were political priests, because that gave them power with the political powers that be. And they felt very comfortable in the situation that had come to Jerusalem because they were prospering and living well in that situation with their compromises. Now, they acknowledged the authority of the law. I capitalize that because what I'm talking about is the law of Moses. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They said, yeah, those words are authoritative. Now you get to Joshua and Samuel and Kings and Chronicles and Psalms and Prophets. That's not authoritative. That's not authority. The authority lies in the law, not in the Psalms and the Prophets. That was the Sadducees. And they denied spiritual things. It was a worldly, earthly philosophy and religion by which they believed. And so they didn't believe in angels, in the immortality of the soul, in the future reward or punishment, or in the resurrection of the dead. And so the little Sunday school teacher would teach us, they were sad, you see. And so the Sadducees, think about them in that manner. Now these Sadducees are going to come ask him questions. So the Sadducees come and, here, the early persecution of the church came from the Sadducees. And the reason it came from them was because the disciples were preaching the resurrection from the dead. In Acts chapter 4, the chief priests encamped into the temple. They were grieved because through Jesus they were preaching the resurrection of the dead. That was going to upset their situation, and so they did not like that. Now, they come to ask him, and they come to Jesus, and they feign a respect. They did not respect Jesus. They were like those that would say, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? And to call the followers of Jesus the Nazarenes, well, that was to put them down. And so they had little regard for this fellow that comes out of Galilee, and of all places, Nazareth, and he thinks he knows so much. But yet when they come to him, what do they say? Before all the people now, they say, Master, Master. That's a term of great respect for a great teacher. But it's a feigned respect that the Sadducees are giving him, and they're going to try to trick him and catch him in his words. They thought they had something he couldn't answer, and so they were going to come expose him now. So they said, Master, Moses wrote to us. Now notice it's Moses. See, the Sadducees acknowledged the authority of Moses. So they said, Moses wrote to us, if a man's brother die and leave his wife behind and leave no children, that his brother should take his wife and raise up seed unto his brother. So, you get married, you have a wife, and then you die without any children. Well, your brother, the next in line, he is to take her, make sure she has children. They can be raised up to inherit the dead brother's then inheritance, see? That was what Moses said, and Moses said that. It's called the Levirate marriage. You find it in Deuteronomy, chapter 24, verses 5 and 6. If brethren dwell together. Now that sounds like these two brothers are living together, and one of them brings a wife into the home. Brethren dwell together, and one of them die and have no children. The wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her to him, the wife, to perform the duty of a husband's brother unto her. And it shall be that the firstborn which she beareth shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead. And so that was the law of Moses. And here's what those Sadducees came up with. They tell this hypothetical situation. Okay, that's what Moses said. Now, what about this? Jesus? There were 7 brethren. Now, this didn't really happen. This is a hypothetical situation. So, what if there were 7 brothers? There were 7 brethren. The first took a wife and dying left no seed. And the second took her and died, neither left he any seed. And the third likewise. You know, if you was the 4th brother, wouldn't you start getting a little suspicious here? Seems like you might be. The 4th likewise. Well, it goes all through all 7 brothers. And the 7 had her and left no seed. Last of all, the woman died also. In the resurrection, therefore, when they shall rise, whose wife shall she be of them? For the 7 had her to wife. What a mess. The resurrection. Wait a minute. This woman, she had 7 husbands. And now the resurrection comes. Now what do? There's 7 brothers and 1 woman, and they all had her. Now what are you going to do in the resurrection? Jesus, what a mess this would be. Well, what are you going to do? Well, they really thought they had a question. Jesus answered and said, do you not therefore err, because you know not the Scriptures, neither the power of God? You know, every now and then people can come up with some kind of dilemma, and they think they really got something. Why, this will discredit the Bible. This will discredit the faith of the Christians. And the answer to that most of the time is they're mistaken. They don't know the Bible, and they don't know the power of God. Now, the Bible is what God has revealed to us. You know, God has not revealed everything. It said in that old law that Moses gave, the secret things belong to God. We don't know what all God has planned. We don't know everything he has in store. We might be able to come up with some hypothetical situations that to us would look like, boy, what a dilemma that would be. But it's not going to be a dilemma for God. God knows things we don't know. He has power that we cannot comprehend, and we can count on what we do know. It's going to be the truth. Whether we come up with some dilemma we can't answer or not doesn't mean God doesn't have answers for that. So you don't know the Scriptures. You have made a mistake here, you Sadducees. You don't know the Scriptures. Now that would really bother the Sadducees for someone to say they didn't know the Scriptures. And neither do you know the power of God. Now first, Jesus is going to talk about the power of God. You see, that's who Jesus was, God in the flesh. He knew things about the resurrection that the Sadducees, they would have had no idea about these things. And Jesus is going to tell them about something that they could not have known. Here's what Jesus says. For when they shall rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels which are in heaven. Now, that's not ever taught in the Scriptures till you get to this point. That's where it's taught. They would know that. You see, Jesus knew. And every now and then we wonder about what's it going to be after the resurrection? In what body will we come? How's it going to be when we are in heaven? And we don't know. We don't know. We only know what's revealed. But God knows the full picture. And here he let those Sadducees in on a little information that he knew that they did not know. There's not going to be marriage in heaven. Now put this in context. The whole point of this law that Moses had given, that the brother would take the dead brother's wife to bear seed by her. It was all about procreation, wasn't it? And that's not what's going to be going on in heaven. I mean, we are in the flesh now, and that's how the flesh propagates itself. That's not how it's going to be in heaven. There's no procreation in heaven, and part of marriage is for that procreation, so that we can raise up what Malachi calls a godly seed. And so we're not to behave like animals. And so God has restricted what we can do here for the purpose of raising godly seed. But that's not going to be the situation in heaven. Now, you might think, well, is that a good thing or a bad thing that there's not going to be any marriage in heaven? You know, for some people, that probably sounds like a relief. Marriage was designed by God to give us great joy and happiness on this earth, but sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Some marriages are, instead of heaven on earth, it's almost like a hell on earth. And to think that you would have to deal with this throughout all eternity would not be a comforting thought, would it? So for some people to think, okay, I'm going to be faithful and loyal and stick this out while here, but I know I'm not going to through with this in heaven, that would probably come as a relief. For others, you would think, oh, how could that be? The joys that we're having here on earth together, you mean that's going to be over? And when we go to heaven, we're not going to be husband and wife anymore? That would not be a comforting thought. But God says there's not going to be marriage. You're not going to be given in marriage in heaven. Now, this is in regard with procreation, yes. But just think, will we know each other in heaven? Well, yes, we will. We're going to sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. We're not going to sit there at the table and not know who they are. We're going to know. And so if you've had a good marriage on this earth, and that one you've loved has gone on before, you can look with great joy of going to be united with them in heaven. And there's going to be a difference in that relationship. Yes, it won't be like it is here on this earth. But if you know one another in heaven, and you've helped one another through life, and now you're both in eternity, both of you there, and probably both of you there because both of you helped each other get there along the way, how could that not be a relationship that is unique in eternity, different than a relationship with anyone else? It may not be like a marriage, but surely that, it's like I sometimes think with Lori and I, we may not be married and given in marriage, but how could we not be best friends when we get to heaven? And so there's going to be some kind of relationship, but it won't be for the purpose of procreation. And that's what God's talking about. Now, he said you'll be like the angels. And so people get this idea. They say, well, when we die, we'll turn into an angel. In fact, there's this idea of you die, and then, what was it? This wonderful life, isn't that it? You got to do some good deed to get your angel wings, and then a bell rings and get your angel wings. Well, now, that's not Bible talk. You know, it doesn't say you die, and then you interfere in human affairs some way, do something good, and then you get your angel wings. It doesn't say that we will be angels. There are a few times in the scriptures where the soul of man is spoken of as an angel. It's talking about the spirit of man. Now, it's not the same as these special creation of God as heavenly messengers that are different than humans, but like when it says the children, their angels do always behold the face of the Father in heaven. I think the best way to understand that, these little children, in their hearts, in their spirit, they want to do what's right. They're looking to see, God, what do you want me to do? That's what the little children are feeling. They're angels behold the face of their Father in heaven. It's not guardian angels here for the children. It's their angels beholding God's face. When Peter was released from prison, remember he knocked on the door? Rhonda came to the door, and it was Peter. And she didn't let him in. She ran back and said, Peter's out there. And they thought, oh, Rhonda, you wasn't. Was it Rhoda? Rhoda, it wasn't Peter. You must have seen his angel. Well, what are they talking about, seen his angel? Well, you must have seen his spirit. Because they thought Peter was probably put to death now. So sometimes the Bible refers to that, but that's not these heavenly beings God calls angels. When it says they'll be as the angels which are in heaven, in the fact that angels, you don't have weddings among angels in heaven. There's not heavenly weddings for the angels. Angels aren't about procreation, and this has probably play into this idea too. The old Jewish fables that talked about angels coming down and desiring women and women bearing children by angels. And now look, that's not what angels do. That's not what angels are about. We are like the angels in heaven in that we're not being married or being given in marriage when we get to heaven. Now the Sadducees wouldn't know that. Jesus knew. He knew the power of God. This whole question is not even a question, because that kind of relationship that is necessary on this earth is not something that's going to be in heaven. But then he turns to the scriptures. He said, you know not the scriptures, nor the power of God. Well, here's the power of God, but here's the scriptures. For when they shall rise from the dead, they neither marry. Well, let me get back to this. Before I get to the scriptures. One more point. These Sadducees here, see, they didn't believe this. Look what Jesus affirmed in these few words. The immortality of the soul. The resurrection from the dead. A future reward in heaven and the existence of angels. That's everything the Pharisees didn't believe. And right there in those few words, he affirmed that. They may have been like those Jehovah's Witnesses that came to me the other day. They pulled up my driveway. And have you ever tried to talk with Jehovah's Witnesses? And usually they don't care about anything you say. They're not going to listen to anything you say. So it's kind of hard. And I've tried to talk with them, and you're not getting anywhere. So a lot of time I just kind of politely send them on their way. But the other day, a couple of ladies pulled up in a car, and in the back seat were 3 young people. And they pulled up, and I knew there was something about it. I just knew. I walked up, and I said, are you all Jehovah's Witnesses? She said, yes, we are. And she said, one of our young people want to ask you a question. So I said, well, ask me the question. And this little girl in the back, she must have been junior high school age, something like that. She had her little pad. She said, do you want to live for eternity? That was a question. Oh. Now, children, see, they'll listen to you. So I said, oh, yes, I want to live in eternity, but I don't want to live on earth like the Watchtower says. I want to go to heaven like the Bible says. And I told them, I said, get your Bibles out. And so look over there in Hebrews where Jesus is our forerunner into heaven itself. Well, now the ladies were getting nervous. And so they interrupted. They said, well, now that may have been one of the 144,000 that he was talking about. I said, well, he's not talking about 144,000 in Hebrews. So that's Revelation. I turned to those kids. I said, look there, first verse. He signified these things. I mean, these are told in signs. You know, have you ever done the math? 144,000, 12 times 12 times 12. Now, that's a symbolic number, isn't it? And so the ladies there said, it says in the Psalms that we'll live in the land forever. I said, oh, yeah, but you know, forever doesn't always mean eternity. And I looked at those children. I said, you ever had that preacher up there? He just talking, and you're thinking he's just going to go on forever. Now, you know it's not eternity. Well, they got tickled. And they were enjoying this. And so I started going from one thing after another. Those ladies said, we're going to have to go. And I said, well, okay, but I sure am glad you came up here today. And you come back and see me bring another load of children. I love teaching children. Now, they left. As they were driving out, the little boy in the back was just waving at me. He'd had such a good time. That's kind of what's happening to these Sadducees. Jesus is now teaching all those people around him all these things: the immortality of the soul, the resurrection from the dead, the future reward in heaven, the existence of all these things. They're probably wishing, I just wish he would quit talking here. But then Jesus turned to the scriptures as touching the dead, that they rise. Have ye not read in the book of Moses? They acknowledged the authority of Moses. Have you not read in the book of Moses how in the bush God spake unto him, saying, I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He's not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. Therefore you do greatly err. Here it is. It's in Exodus 3. I'm not going to read all of this, but let's get out. This is when Moses comes to the burning bush, and God says, take your feet off. You're standing on holy ground. And Moses wanted to know about him. He said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Look at that am. I highlighted it here because I wanted you to notice that. It's a verb of being, but he didn't say, I was that God. Past tense. I am. Present tense. I am right now the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Now, that's what Jesus said. Did you hear how Moses, I am? See, the whole thing depends, the whole argument Jesus makes depends on this word, and specifically the tense of this word being present and not past tense. Here's what Matthew says. Have ye not read that was spoken unto you of God, saying, I am? This is the verbal inspiration of the scriptures. If he had not used that word in that tense, he couldn't have made that argument. When you're reading the scriptures, it's the words that come from God, and you can go all the way down to the very tense of the verbs that are used come from God. I am the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And then the conclusion, he's not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. See, the Pharisees thought there's no immortality of the soul, so there's nothing to be raised. Well, the first step, let's establish this. The soul lives on. And so that sets it up for a resurrection. And that's the logic Jesus is doing there. I'm the God of the dead and not the God of the living. 7 things you learn from this. Number 1, there is a resurrection. Number 2, death is not annihilation. The soul lives on. Number 3, there are angels. Jesus acknowledged angels. Number 4, there is a heaven. Number 5, neither we nor the angels will marry or be given in marriage in heaven. That's not what heaven's about. That's for this earth. That's not for heaven. Number 6, inspiration extends to the verbal tenses. But number 7, here's what I want you to get. Jesus is the Christ. You see, he spoke with authority about things which man did not know. He knew all about it. He knew the power of God. And he knew the scriptures. He knew their inspiration. He knew how to apply reason and logic. Because you know what? They were his scriptures to begin with. The law of Moses was his law. He knew what it said. And so they were astonished. Matthew tells us they were astonished at the things he said. Let me close with this. John 5:28 and 29. Marvel not at this. The hour is coming in which all that are in the grave shall hear his voice and shall come forth. They that have done good unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation. And so we want to be ready. We want to raise to life and not raise to damnation. And so let's make sure we're ready. Let's do what the Lord says. Let's be baptized into Christ. Let's rise from this watery grave so we can rise from that earthly grave with a hope of heaven beyond. And if you'd like to do that this morning, we'll take that time and do that. You can come forward as we stand and sing.